Hey up. Welcome to a new series on the DVD release company Dripping Blood Theatre. Now this is a little pre-warning before we crack on. In some way that even I'm not fully aware of yet, Dripping Blood Theatre is connected to the Dead of Night collection. For those who don't know, the Dead of Night collection is another DVD release company that I've done reviews for already on this channel. And I will be making reference to the Dead of Night throughout these new reviews. So if you've not seen the old reviews, maybe go check them out for context and stuff like that. Anyway, let's begin. So why have I chosen this release to discuss? I mean, I'm guessing most of you have never even heard of them before. Well, neither had I, until I was researching the Dead of Night collection back in 2015. You may remember, in my Dead of Night intro episode, I said this. With the help of the Music Magpie barcode inputter, I was able to check the missing barcodes. It appears that numbers 21 and 24 were never released, even though number 24 shows up as another release of Just for the Hell of It. And the same for numbers 26 through to 35. Instead, it seems that numbers 26 through to 30, they released double feature DVDs under the name Dripping Blood Theatre. My theory is that these 10 films were planned as Dead of Night films, but were rushed into double feature films, but then they had one left over, so just released it under Dead of Night at the end. Cheers past me, you sound absolutely knackered. Anyway, I kind of forgot about Dripping Blood shortly after this, and it wasn't till I was about midway through doing the Vipco reviews sometime last year that I suddenly remembered Dripping Blood, and it was around the same time that I remembered the Shock Horror box set. So I grabbed the box set, which I've already done a review of, and I grabbed one DVD released under Dripping Blood, just to see if there was any connection to Dead of Night. Well, straight away I could see that these are definitely the same company. The biggest giveaway being this box at the bottom here. It's an exact copy with the wording being identical. Outside of that, the logos look kinda similar, and just the overall shoddiness. Like this little cross being present in the top corner of every front cover, it's a dead giveaway. Also the spine numbers carry on in a fashion. I've already said this in my Dead of Night intro, which I've already shown, but the numbers on the Dead of Night, it misses out 24 for some reason, then moves to 25, where there's this huge jump all the way up to 36. And the spine numbers on Dripping Blood, as we can see here, they go from 26 through to 30, partially filling that gap. There is absolutely no information on this company online. Of course there's not. And out of all the release companies I've discussed, these are the hardest to find buyable versions of, with some of them fetching ridiculous prices. There was one little similarity that I did find with an American release company. They've put out very similar double features, so I don't know, maybe somebody copied somebody else. It doesn't really give us much. They might be just identical prints. Who knows? Also, as of recording this, I have not tried a disc yet. I have no idea what is actually on these discs. I'm going in completely blind, and you are more than welcome to join me on that. Will we find some more similarities to the Dead of Night along the way? Probably. Probably. Each episode will consist of a review of one disc, which means 2 films per episode. That's right. These cram 2 feature films on one disc. What a bargain. I just know that these are going to be some of the worst DVD prints we have ever seen on this review channel so far. Also, a little aside, these aren't going to be released weekly. These are going to be as and when I find the time to be able to actually do them. I know my other reviews were weekly, but I've got 2 feature films to watch here. These are going to be a little more spread out. But for consistency's sake, I will be uploading on Thursdays. So maybe check out the channel on a Thursday, see if I've put anything up. And please bear with me on that as well. I'll try and get through them as quickly as possible, but you know, it might take a little more time. So, get ready as we take a look at a release company that genuinely this time, nobody at all gives a shit about. And I say that more sincerely than I've ever said that before, because who the hell cares about these? I don't know why I do it to myself, really. I don't know. We're going to be checking out, next episode, the two films, Tormented and Revolt of the Zombies. Heyo. So, it's time to take a look at disc 1 of the Dripping Blood Theatre DVD series. And what better way to start than by jumping straight in and taking a look at the first film in this double bill, Tormented, which is a 1960 American ghost film directed by Burt I. Gordon, who pretty much spent his entire career making terrible B-movies just like this one. The only thing really of note about this film is that it was featured on Mystery Science Theatre 3000, which is a show that I'm not really familiar with, but I do know that if a film's featured on there, it's usually a sign that it is terrible. Let's take a look, shall we?
I've got to take it easy. I didn't find any dead woman, only seaweed.
Five thou.
5 thou.
So the film follows Tom, who's a jazz pianist, and his girlfriend falls off a lighthouse after he tells her that he's leaving her for another woman. He doesn't really help the situation, and she dies getting lost at sea. Sometime later, he's marrying the other woman, but the ghost of his ex-girlfriend comes back to haunt him and drive him crazy. It's not got a terrible plot for this sort of B-movie, and there are moments of suspense here and there, and some funny moments too. The real problem though is in the pacing. I was getting very bored towards the end, and that's quite an achievement for a film that only clocks in at 75 minutes.
Why, where?
The effects in this are quite sweet, really. You know, they're juvenile but quite endearing. The floating body parts and the appearing, disappearing footprints, especially are highlights. The acting, for the most part, is okay. The woman who plays the ghost is absolutely terrible. Very melodramatic and just ridiculous. And apparently, the lead actor had to have all his lines redubbed. I think it's saying something when the best actor in the whole film was like a 9-year-old girl. There are some laughs here and there, some funny moments, and there's a dude who speaks entirely in 60s slang, which is quite entertaining. And I think really, that's about all I've got to say on this one. So let's move on, shall we, to the second of the double feature.
Why, do you know how old I am? I'm practically 9. Why, in China and Borneo and India and places like that, girls already have husbands at my age.
What is this?
Look, I don't want nothing from you, Dad. I really don't. She owes me a fin, that's all, and I thought it'd be nice to have.
So, feature number 2 is Revolt of the Zombies, which is a 1936 zombie film directed by Victor Halperin, who is probably most well known for directing White Zombie, which, funnily enough, this is the spiritual successor to. But unlike White Zombie, this film has no Bela Lugosi, technically, and it's shit.
Be confined where he never again can use his occult knowledge.
Quite right, General.
Right?
I suppose so.
Hire me Nicole.
The film follows these blokes who learn of a Cambodian army who are all zombified and under the control of this master dude. So they set off to a place called Angkor to learn more about it. While there though, there's a love triangle and it drives one of the guys insane. He learns about the zombie magic and he creates his own army. This film is absolutely dreadful. Just terrible. It's about 63 minutes long, but it feels like it's about 3 hours. The plot is completely aimless. Things just happen out of nowhere, and other plot points just never get resolved. It either feels like there's parts of the film missing, or it's just some really cheap rush job. And the love triangle feels so forced that it's laughable. Bad acting, flat cinematography, and what this film basically boils down to is just boring people talking in various rooms, with no special effects, no action, nothing, just very boring. Something that I found out though is that we keep getting a shot of eyes popping up, sort of like the hypnosis eyes. Those eyes belong to Bela Lugosi, so he is in this film in some way. And even though he's just a static shot of eyes, he's still the best part of this film. Another interesting thing, now this is to do with the print, and that's something we're going to be discussing a little bit more next, but this one is such a weird oddity that I can't wait to bring it up basically. So you press play on Revolt of the Zombies on the DVD, and you're instantly greeted with 15 seconds from another film, and I instantly clocked it as Night of the Living Dead. It's one of the scenes where the main guy is outside and he's bashing a zombie in at night. And I clocked that. Then it skips to about 5-10 seconds worth of footage from Revolt of the Zombies, but later on in the film where the guy's insane and he's laughing. Then the film starts proper. No idea how a little clip from Night of the Living Dead ended up on this disc at all. And I cross-referenced it, I found the scene in Night of the Living Dead and it is definitely from that film. I'll show you in the clips next. But I tell you what, it really made me wish I was watching Night of the Living Dead instead of this shit. Let's take a look at this print then, and I'm pretty sure it's what you were expecting. So, Tormented has got a terrible print. It's awful, it's scratchy and it's grainy, and there's like a flickering along the bottom. It looks like a VHS rip that is also from very dirty film stock. It also has this weird issue where like a shadow keeps appearing, and at first I thought it was like a special effect. It was trying to be the ghost or something, but I don't think it was. I think it was just transferred incorrectly. And speaking of being transferred incorrectly, I think they did it at the wrong frame rate, because there's a really bad issue of blurring and ghosting that happens. So, not a great print. Revolt of the Zombies, on the other hand, isn't as bad, you know? It's still scratchy, it's still grainy, but it's a lot sharper. It doesn't scream VHS rip to me. Obviously it's got the issue of having the wrong film at the beginning, and the major issue with this print, I would say, is the audio, which sounds like it was recorded off of a very overly used vinyl. Very hissy, poppy, not great, a lot of background noise. So overall, yeah, these prints are pretty bad, pretty much what you'd expect, but they're not unwatchable, and to be fair, this is 2 feature films crammed on 1 disc, so it's kinda to be expected.
Am I too early or too late?
I'm so happy you made it in time.
You don't think I'd let my daughter marry without her favorite father?
Could I have had for that? Same reason as for all these changes have been made since I was sent over for these men, and you schemed to marry Claire.
And let's look at the case. It's all fine, all the information's correct, and the synopsis is brief, to the point, and spelling error free. I also like the style of the border. Looks like they put in a bit more effort than on the Dead of Night releases. And on the disc, we get no special features, which is to be expected with there being 2 features on here. The menu's nice and spelling error free, and it's nice that you can choose which film you want to watch. And there are chapter selects for each one as well. More detail than I expected, to be honest. Overall then, while I was quite impressed with the actual release of this, the prints weren't quite as bad as I was expecting, and the packaging and menus and stuff were all quite competent. The films, unfortunately though, left a lot to be desired. Tormented was a bit of campy fun that suffered in its pacing, and Revolt of the Zombies was just an absolute mess. I couldn't honestly recommend either of these films, and I have a feeling that that's going to be a running theme throughout this series. So what I've decided to do instead is find a film that does it better, basically. Find a better version of the crap that I've been watching, and I'm going to recommend that to you instead. So don't watch Tormented. Check out these instead. The Ghost Stories for Christmas that the BFI have put out. This is a collection of short British horror films from the 60s through to the 80s, I think. In fact, there's something in the early 2000s as well, that like remakes and stuff. Especially the short Whistle and I'll Come to You. Very atmospheric, very creepy. These are just some interesting, shorter, creepy, old-fashioned ghost stories that are very effective and very good. Don't watch Tormented, watch these. And don't watch Revolt of the Zombies, watch White Zombie instead. Got Bela Lugosi, got a really annoying bird in that for some reason, and it's just a much better film. Or, in fact, why not watch Night of the Living Dead? I mean, it advertises it at the beginning, doesn't it? So, don't check out these films at all. Another thing, you might be wondering, why are these 2 films put together? Let's see, shall we? Let's put on our pretentious film analysing caps and try and figure out a reason why these 2 films have been lumped together. So, we've got romance in both of these, romance gone wrong, guys being arseholes. So maybe these 2's theme could be men behaving badly or something like that. I don't know, I'm just bullshitting. So, these weren't great. Let's hope that the next episode brings some slightly better films. We're going to be checking out Track of the Vampire and Nightmare Castle. Hey up. So we're on to disc 2 this episode, and let's hope we get some better films than the last episode, because those 2 that we watched last weren't very good at all. Let's get started straight away, shall we, with Track of the Vampire. But actually, we're not starting with that. I fooled you, because the films on the disc are the opposite order to this, and I thought I'd just watch it in the order the disc suggests. So we're actually starting with Nightmare Castle, which is a 1965 supernatural drama from Italy, directed by a guy called Mario Caiano. Sorry, I keep forgetting his name. Mario Caiano, going under the pseudonym on the back of the case, unless it's a typo, Alan Grunwald. Now, this guy is not really done much of note. The film stars Paul Muller, who you might recognise from a few Jess Franco films, such as Venus in Furs and Count Dracula, And we've also got Barbara Steele in this, who was in 8½, and she's played a dual role in this film. Now, this isn't the type of Italian cinema that we're used to seeing on this channel. It's not a giallo, it's not an exploitation film. Instead, it's more akin to an Italian daytime soap opera with ghosts.
You're leaving for the Edinburgh Congress with a lot of fanatical good-for-nothings like yourself, I suppose.
Don't you ever dare to speak to me like that, Muriel.
Oh, I'm going to rid you of your vulgar ways and replace them with others much more subtle and refined.
I don't understand you.
It doesn't matter.
Don't go away, Dave.
Who are you? Muriel?
The film follows Stephen, a crazy scientist and gold digger who finds his wife cheating on him, so he kills the wife and her lover and hopes to get some money out of his wife's will, but that all backfires. So his next course of action is to marry his wife's identical sister, drive her insane slowly, and eventually get some money out of her. But with the help of the ghosts of his dead wife, her dead lover, and the help of a friendly doctor, they might just be able to thwart his evil scheme. This is an incredibly dull film. It sticks to just slowly talking about things and lacks any action or suspense. It's a shame really, because there is an interesting plot buried in this. Instead, it just does nothing really.
Come in.
Excuse me, sir. I forgot about the clean towel.
Oh, that's all right.
The acting and dubbing in this film are ridiculously awful, with some great stupid lines here and there. The characters, though, unfortunately, are very one-note and bland, and it's really hard to latch onto anyone in this. People say people's names a lot in this. You'll hear Stephen more than anything in this film, and it gets pretty silly. We get a little bit of gore in this, actually, which is more than can be said for the other two films that we've watched in this series. But it's nothing to write home about. It's actually pretty badly done. And the rest of the film is just people discussing what might happen, and we don't really get to see much of anything at all. The film's shot in black and white, but it's compressed to such a degree where there's barely any grayscale, so it looks more like Begotten, which means that some shots unintentionally look quite artsy, but the rest of the film is just a muddy mess and it's hard to see what the hell's happening at all. The best part of the film is a dream sequence where we get some crazy edits and a little cameo by Slender Man. I'll show you the clip in the clips section coming up. I think really that's all I've got to say on this one, so let's move on to the next film. So the next film is Track of the Vampire, and it isn't what it appears to be. Originally a Roger Corman film called Operation Titan, which was written by Francis Ford Coppola, it was scrapped because nobody really liked it. Later it was re-edited as a drive-in flick called Portrait of Blood. Again, not doing too well. It was shipped off to Jack Hill and Stephanie Rothman, who re-edited it, reshot bits, and turned it into a vampire film called Bloodbath. Now the story doesn't quite end there, because Bloodbath had bits reshot and re-edited and was turned into a TV version in 1966, and that is called Track of the Vampire, and that's the version that we're checking out today. So after all this history and all this mess, is the film any good? Let's have a look, shall we? plot to this one's quite simple really. It's about an artist who paints popular pieces of nude and murdered women. He lures women back to his studio so that he can paint them and then kill them, because he's also a vampire. And I won't spoil the ending, because it's actually pretty good. I really enjoyed this one. It's got a great pace, it's got some artsy moments, and it's just nicely structured. You know, you can tell it's a TV edit, it's not particularly gory or anything like that, but I enjoyed it nonetheless.
A lot of peculiar things happened up in there. But I can't tell you about them, because you're just too smart.
But I'd like to know about the legend.
So find out for yourself. Don't come bothering me. I got my own problems.
The acting and characters are all pretty good in this one. Even the side characters have got a lot of depth to them, and Sid Haig's here, which is always a bonus. There's a lot of suspense, and there's some very funny moments as well. Again, this is a black and white film, but in this case it works in its favour, because there's some really nice, interesting sets and a really good use of shadows. This film also loves dancing. There's like a 5-minute ballet scene on a beach with some crazy camera edits. I'd say though, for a film that's been chopped and changed and messed about with so much, I actually got a pretty decent product out of it. Now, I don't really want to go into too much more with this one, I don't want to spoil it because it is pretty good, so I think I'll just leave it there.
Bruno, it's really great. I'm impressed.
Max, what do you think?
Interesting.
Okay, time to talk about the prints. Let's start with Nightmare Castle. I've already said there was a contrast issue. Outside of that though, the print was very low quality. It was a filthy film stock, very grainy and flickery, and there were like big spots that kept appearing on it. Also the audio was terrible, there was a very loud hiss all the way throughout the film. And something that was very strange was the black bars at the top and the bottom kept moving up and down. No idea how that was. I'm guessing the film that they transferred over wasn't lined up right. I'll show you an example at the bottom. But the black bars also had quite a soft edge to them, implying that there's some curving of the film maybe. Just a very weird looking thing. I'll show you in the clips. Now for the Track of the Vampire. Now this was a much cleaner print, but was by no means a clean print. Still had some VHS flickers and quite a lot of grain and dirt. It was a much clearer image, but quite a dirty film stock. And the sound on this one had some appalling moments where it sounded like they were recording next to roadworks or something. Not the worst, watchable, but a lot left to be desired. Now, something that was common between both these films, now this is really weird, so I'm going to have to try and figure out how to describe it. So, at the beginning of Nightmare Castle, there was one frame of credits for Barbara Steele, and it does something really weird. And the same goes for the beginning of Track of the Vampire, sort of the pre-title card, like, bit of footage. They both do this thing where you can see this border around the side of the film. Now, it stands out for one because it's colour on black and white film. It's only a couple pixels around it, but it looks to me like somebody's desktop background image, which makes me think that they've recorded these films off of a computer, like they've just like screen recorded these films or something. I don't know, that seems really strange, but they both disappear. I'll show you examples of them, but I really want to know what the full image is, because you can sort of see maybe some sky and then like some dirt or something. It looks like sort of like a landscape. I don't know, I'm kind of rambling and speculating here. I just have no idea what it is, and I really want to find out more.
and they were covered with blood. I was trying to move the slab with my nails.
I forgive you for everything, Melissa. Do you hear? For everything. But now I need you.
Time to take a look at this case. It's fine, but both the run times are incorrect. Track of the Vampire is actually 75 minutes long, and Nightmare Castle is only 80 minutes. At least both the films were shorter this time. I feel like both these films were cut though, so maybe they're using the unedited times that they've pulled offline or something. Outside of that though, all the other info is correct, and on the disc, same as last time, except of course that the films are switched over, we get nothing new, no special features or anything like that, but we do get some decent menus where we can chapter select, we can choose the film, and yeah, it's not too bad, it's not too bad. Overall then, we've got one awful film and one pretty decent film. Nightmare Castle suffered from not really being much of anything, but Track of the Vampire shined for being a short, funny, tense, well-made little vampire film. I can't recommend Nightmare Castle to you at all, but if you're interested in a 60s ghost film, then I'd highly recommend checking out 1963's The Haunting, one of my favourite ghost films ever made. Just avoid the remake. Or even, I'd recommend, if you want to see something that's in black and white, check out Begotten. It's a surrealist, experimentalist, black and white with no grayscaling art film that's completely silent, and you know what? It's way more entertaining than Nightmare Castle. On the other side though, I can recommend Track of the Vampire. Highly recommend Track of the Vampire. But not this version. Avoid this DVD, it looks like crap. Instead, check out the Bloodbath box set that Arrow have put out, which contains every version of this film that I mentioned earlier. All 4 versions, all nice 2K restorations. So, definitely check that out and avoid this one. I'm tempted to get it, and it's still available as well, so might be worth grabbing before it disappears. And the theme for the 2 films. So both films had really good dream sequences in it. So maybe that's our theme. Maybe the theme is good dreams. Aw, isn't that nice? So, another 2 films down. And on the next episode, we're going to be checking out 2 films that I have been very excited to watch. We're going to be watching A Bucket of Blood and The Giant Gila Monster. What the hell is a Gila Monster? Can't wait to find out. Hey up. Today we're going to be checking out Disc 3, and we're going to get started straight away, I think, with A Bucket of Blood, which is a 1959 black and white American parody horror film directed by Roger Corman, whose name might sound familiar from the last episode, because he made the very first incarnation of Track of the Vampire, which, if you remember, went through about 5 iterations before ending up as this. Bucket of Blood also stars Dick Miller, who is a name and a face you'll probably recognise. He's been in a bunch of stuff, but I recognised him from being in Small Soldiers and the Gremlins franchise. So, pretty decent. Seems like there's some interesting people involved. Let's see if the film's any good.
Be your nose. Be your nose. Don't you like it?
The film follows a simpleton waiter called Walter, played by Dick Miller. who works at a beatnik bar and dreams of one day being an artist. After being ignored and picked on by the more popular crowd, and a mishap involving a cat, Walter creates a groundbreaking sculpture, but with a dark twist, and it eventually spirals out of control. The plot to this is fantastic and a hell of a lot of fun, keeps up the pace, and it mixes comedy and horror really well. With only a 64-minute runtime, it doesn't even have a chance to overstay its welcome or get boring.
Did you see my cat?
What's the matter? You losing?
And if you're gonna be an artist, you've got to do nudes. Right. Ain't nobody an artist unless he does nudes.
The acting is fantastic here, especially Dick Miller, who's incredibly sympathetic and endearing, obviously to a point. The parody of the beatnik era with the elongated pontificating, pretentious poetry and specific dietary requirements is actually pretty funny, and it's a nice juxtaposition to the more overly romanticised view of the subculture that we get a lot nowadays. And it even sort of mirrors the modern hipster and how they're portrayed. It also touches upon the art world and the idea of keep on creating to stay relevant, which is a topic that I find quite fascinating. It's well made, well shot, and has got a great jazzy soundtrack. The kills can be a little tame, but they're still quite effective, and the designs for the sculptures are excellent. It also has a fantastic The End screen. Can't believe how much I enjoyed this one, you know. Like, might be the best one so far. I think, you know, it is generally, like, quite well praised, this film. People say that it's one of Roger Corman's best, and it even had a TV remake and a musical. And that's all I've got to say on this one. Pretty damn good. Let's move on to the next.
You can make $25,000 on these pieces alone.
I thought you put money down.
I do, but $25,000?
Leave me alone.
Watch it, the plate pot.
Are these fertile eggs?
Are these eggs fertile? Naturally.
What'd you fry them in?
We ran out of the safflower seed oil, but I found a bottle of peanut oil on the shelf. Don't worry, it's not hydrogenated.
Is that the cold pressed stuff or the junk Hilda bought by mistake?
Okay, next up. The stupidest name out of the lot. We've got the giant Gila monster. Or sorry, should I say the giant Gila monster, as it's actually pronounced, with one L. We'll talk more about that later. This one's also from 1959 and is a Texan monster movie directed by Ray Kellogg, who hasn't really done anything apart from a film called The Killer Shrews, so take of that what you will. This film was featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000, which is never a good sign. Let's take a look, shall we?
Buying a car, son, is just like getting married or going to New York City. Everybody ought to do it once, but nobody ought to do it twice.
The film's about a small Texan town where people are going missing. Turns out they're all being killed off by a giant lizard, and it's up to perfect boy car mechanic / singer and a sheriff to save the day. As you can probably tell, this is awful. The plot is bare bones and loose. Every character's got like this little weird subplot for like one scene and then it's completely forgotten about. Honestly, I'd have rather watched a film about goody two-shoes car mechanic trying to make it as a rock and roll singer, which is a subplot in this. Forget all the giant lizard shit, it's pointless. This film is all talk and no action. Pure boredom.
Horace? Morning, Sheriff. Let me smell your breath.
Laughing's important, isn't it, Chase?
Oh, it sure is. And you know, I never felt any more like laughing than I do right now. I didn't think you'd be able to do that good in a week.
Didn't you, really?
Honest?
The acting's fine. It's not great, but it's fine, and the characters are somewhat likeable, if a little too flawless and neatly packaged. And there's some decent music here and there in this. I quite like some of the rock and roll music. And that is where my praises end. Let's talk about the lizard. So it's not played by a Gila monster, which is an actual type of lizard. It's played by just a regular bearded dragon. Just a small regular bearded dragon. So they try and imply scale with little sets, but you only see 2 or 3 little sets. The rest of it is just shots of this lizard looking through bushes and stuff. You never see it interact with a character at all. So it's really hard to figure out how big this thing's supposed to be. One of the characters described its footprints as being as big as a double-decker bus or something like that, or maybe the monster itself is as big as a double-decker bus, but at no point does it feel that way. It doesn't have loud thumping footsteps or big roar or anything like that to imply its scale. It's just a cute little lizard that licks its tongue and patters around. It's laughable, but it's also massively disappointing with its lack of ambition. And you know what? A rubber suit would have been better in this instance. I think that's all I've got to say on this one. Okay, time to talk about the prints. So, Bucket of Blood is pretty terrible really. It's very low quality and highly compressed. Looks to me a bit like a VHS rip with the flickers, but it's also got really bad film grain issues, and the contrast is just way off. The darks are far too dark in this. Also, the sound is really muffled, and the music is way louder than the dialogue. It's hard to tell what people are saying sometimes. Just a massive shame because the film's so good. Giant Gila Monster looks about as shit as you'd imagine. It's like watching it with a concussion. It's very, very blurry. And anytime you get like a quick cut section, not that there are many in this film, but every time you do, you can't see what the hell is happening. Also, once again, sounds pretty shit, all muffled and hard to make out. Just 2 really bad prints this time.
How'd you ever get me in that bed, anyway? I carried you in there and I sat on you.
Now for the case, and like the prints, this is the worst one yet. For starters, they spelt Gila wrong in every place they possibly could, all over the case and menus. There is also a big spelling error here. Wax Uzium Gendres? Oh, I don't know. I think though, this might be the first spelling issue we've seen in this collection so far, at least one so blatant. Outside of that though, all the info's fine. It's worded a little weirdly, and the runtimes are fine too as well. Bucket of Blood's 2 minutes off, but nothing major. And on the disc, same old stuff again, just the films, but laid out quite nicely. And no anomalies this time, which is nice, no weird borders or anything like that. Overall then, 1 good and 1 bad. Bucket of Blood is a great little film with fantastic characters and a fun and funny story, whereas Giant Gila Monster is a boring and pathetic mess. I would definitely recommend checking out A Bucket of Blood if it looks interesting to you. I know I usually recommend something different, but in this case, this film's good enough to be recommended on its own. There are Blu-ray releases available. I'm not too sure on the release companies, but I had a look, but none of them really stood out to me as ones that I know. Maybe they're imports, I'm not sure. But it's also included for free on Amazon Prime streaming, and in colour, and with a decent print by the looks of it, so highly recommend checking that out if you've got Amazon Prime. Giant Gila Monster, I would not recommend, obviously. I'd recommend something else. Maybe like Godzilla or Them. You know, pretty obvious choices, but way better than this piece of shit. So, now it's time in the video where we try and figure out why these 2 films were put on the same disc together, what draws them together. Now there's an obvious answer, and a not so obvious answer. The obvious answer is that they're both made in 1959, but that's boring. I prefer the not so obvious answer, which is that in both of these films there is in-film singing, so technically they're both musicals. So, polar opposite films this time, and next episode we're going to be checking out Blood Creature and Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory. Sounds saucy. Hey up. Another day, another disc, and there are only 2 discs left in this collection. So let's get cracking straight away, shall we? With Blood Creature, more commonly known as Terror is a Man. This is a 1959 American/Filipino body horror film, directed by Gerardo de Leon, going here under the name Jerry de Leon. Now this is part of the Blood Island quadrilogy, which is not something I'm aware of, and none of the films sound familiar either, but they all have something to do with being set on Blood Island. So let's have a look and see what this Blood Creature's all about then, shall we?
No, thank you.
You sure? Say, what is aku aku?
You must have been talking to Tiago, huh?
Yes, he gave me this.
Yeah, that's an aku aku. It's a sort of good luck charm. All they need.
So the review for this film is going to be a little bit different to all my other reviews. I can't really talk about it how I usually would, and that's because the film as it's presented on this disc is pretty much unwatchable. So the main issue, the reasoning behind that, is that the first 20 minutes or so are just completely out of sync, and I'm talking massively out of sync here. You've got about a 15-minute delay. The audio is from later in the film and the visuals are from earlier, and none of it makes any sense. And then suddenly, after just under 20 minutes, the video just catches up mid-sentence and suddenly it's back and it's in sync. And this is only a 72-minute long film, so watching this I had pretty much the first act of the film completely missing. And yeah, I still watched the entire thing. So my theory behind this, why is it like this, I'm wondering. My theory is that, so this film is about 15-20 minutes shorter than is advertised on the back of the case. If both of these films had been full, if they'd been the runtime that they advertised, you'd have got pretty much about 3 hours worth of footage on one disc, and I know that DVDs struggle with that sort of thing. Look at the DVD release of It, for example. You had to turn that over halfway through, just so the quality was still good and so you could get 3 hours worth of a film on one disc. But you had to flip that. These, they're all on the same side. So my theory is they suddenly went, oh shit, we've got too much film for DVD here. So they chopped out a chunk of footage from this film, moved it up, and then got rid of the beginning bit of audio. Why they'd do that, I have no idea, and if they actually did do that, who knows, that's just my speculation. But either way, this is definitely the worst thing we have seen in this entire collection so far, and it does unfortunately render this film pretty much unwatchable.
I'm sorry.
Is one of them the boy's mother, Tiago's?
Yes. She was our servant. Her name was Alicia. She was killed the first time the animal escaped. She was the first one.
Luckily the plot was pretty straightforward for this one, so even after missing a big chunk of it, I did still manage to catch up. It's basically just a retelling of The Island of Dr. Moreau, with the mad scientist in this one turning a panther into a man as opposed to the other way around. It actually seemed pretty decent, honestly, which makes this whole thing even more of a massive shame. The acting was alright, and the pacing maybe a little slow, but not necessarily boring, just more of a casual pace. The panther design seemed pretty interesting as well, even if we didn't see too much of it. It just seemed like a half-decent mad scientist body horror film, really. Just completely ruined by an incompetent release company, I guess. Maybe the worst issue we've seen, but definitely not the worst film. And honestly, I think with the issues, that's all I can say on this one. So let's move on to the next. Okay, time for some werewolf. Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory is a 1961 Italian horror film directed by Paolo Hirsch, going under the name Robert Benson, and he hasn't really done much of anything except being the casting director for Caligula. How weird is that? Now, I haven't watched a werewolf film since I did my Vipco review of Werewolf of Washington. Which is not a good sign. Let's hope this film is better than this one.
Aren't you forgetting, Mary, that you have the letters? The letters. When you give them to me, I'll free you.
They're burned. Remember, they're important proof. Very important. So careful.
The film is about a girls' reform school. A new teacher rocks up and a girl is mysteriously killed by what appears to be a wolf. So the characters, very slowly, discuss what could be the true cause before another attack happens. This film is very dull. It just feels drawn out and the plot is incredibly bare bones, even though it's only got an 83-minute runtime. There's no threat or action, it is just people slowly discussing stuff. By about 30 minutes in, I was pretty much done with it, and it never picks up. Even its climactic ending scene feels drawn out.
So Walter was the monster?
No. He couldn't be the monster.
But why not?
Because Walter had a dog.
We get some funny dubbing and acting here and there, but more than anything, it just feels like it's very drawn out and elongated with very strange pauses. And the characters themselves, they're one note, and you can't really latch on to any of them. The werewolf is, unfortunately, kind of generic and feels kind of uninspired, and you barely see it as well. As for the way it's shot and the score, they're all very by the books, and once again, uninspired. Just one boring set.
It's necessary to have a second injection.
I know.
Oh, darling, please, let us finish the cure now.
No. Better that you leave me like this.
Okay, time for the prints. So obviously, Blood Creature is ruined by the syncing issue, but outside of that, the print itself is absolutely awful. It's barely watchable, and by the end, it's just a staticky, dark mess. It pops and flickers every now and again. It skips frames completely, and the sound is just awful. Just a massive shame, because as I've said earlier, this film could have been good. Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory is the better of the two prints, but it's not good. It's slightly clearer, but it's still covered in dirt and grain, and it flickers from time to time, and the sound is so badly compressed, and it pops all the time. Just an awful, awful set of prints on this disc.
That's a bad bruise, Selena. Where did you get that?
It's nothing.
Who did that to you, Selena?
No one.
Pereira?
No.
Now for the case, and we're back again with spelling issues. Here they put impassionate instead of impassioned, which massively changes the context of the sentence. And here we've got monstrous instead of monstrous. And lastly, they put Jerry DeLion instead of Jerry DeLeon. Those are spelling errors, but also the run times are off with this one too, with Blood Creature actually only being 72 minutes, and Werewolf being 83 minutes. And on the disc, it's all fine, same as usual. But I have found something out. So now, some of you may remember on the Track of the Vampire and Nightmare Castle episode of this series, Track of the Vampire had this really weird border around it for a few minutes. Well, thanks to Blood Creature, I figured out what the whole image is. As you can see here, at the beginning of Blood Creature, there's this image of a drive-in theatre with the film playing inside. The film then zooms out and fills the screen. As you can see now, the image and the border line up. So clearly, they just forgot to add the animation to Track of the Vampire. Some very shoddy work, but now at least we can put that mystery to bed. Overall then, this has got to be the worst disc in the entire collection so far. One film that looks like it could be promising, but absolutely butchered by dripping blood, and another that pretty much had me falling asleep. Now, I can't actually recommend Blood Creature because I didn't see all of it, but it does look like there might be something there. If it looks interesting to you, I'd say maybe check it out. Or maybe check out The Island of Dr. Moreau. Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory, I would say avoid at all costs. It is a massively dull mess. Instead, I'd recommend Universal's The Wolfman, a classic, or maybe even Ginger Snaps, way more entertaining than this piece of shit. So it's that time again. Why are these two films on the same disc? What draws them together? This one, maybe kind of obvious, but I like how it sounds. Mad Doctors and Man Beasts. So, very disappointing this week. And next episode, we're going to be watching the last disc in the entire collection. We're going to be checking out Screaming Skull and the Werewolf vs. Vampire Woman. Hey up. Here we are then, the last disc in the entire collection. Let's get started with Screaming Skull, which is a 1958 independent American horror film, directed by and starring Alex Nicole, who hasn't really done much outside of this. This is another film to be featured in Mystery Science Theater 3000, and as we've seen with previous films, never a good sign. Let's take a look.
The Screaming Skull is a motion picture that reaches its climax in shocking horror. Its impact is so terrifying that it may have an unforeseen effect. It may kill you.
Well, we didn't get very far before she died. But now that you're here, it's going to be lovely again.
The film follows a woman called Jenny who moves into a new husband's house. Turns out though, her new husband's ex-wife died in this house, and spooky skull-related incidents start happening, causing her to slowly lose her mind. Emphasis on the slowly, as this film is incredibly dull. It's got a very bare-bones plot, and it just sort of meanders around mundane conversations instead of focusing on any action or scares. It does have its charm with the effects, which got a few laughs out of me, but not enough to make the film enjoyable. In my opinion, the skull is the star of the show. Whenever it floats along or pops up somewhere, it got a good giggle out of me. The effects are cheap, but as I said, they're quite endearing, very 50s. The characters are all one note and forgettable. That is, except for Mickey, who is the simpleton gardener played by the director. Now apparently this film was all crafted by this guy so that he could play a character that he wanted to play, as opposed to playing some other character that some other directors forcing him to play, because he was an actor first, then he did this and starred in it. Why he chose this character though, I have no idea. Not only is he barely in it, but he's pretty terrible. But then again, so's the whole film. With only a 67-minute runtime, it's still managed to drag along. I think I'm going to leave it there for this one, so now let's move on to the next and final film.
Mickey! Mickey! Mickey!
It's a handsome one, isn't he? So cuddly and warm. When I was a little girl, I used to want to be a caterpillar.
Another werewolf film, it seems. Let's hope it's better than the last one that we saw. This one also doubles up as a vampire film. The Werewolf vs. Vampire Woman, also known as Shadow the Vampire, is a 1970 Spanish/German sequel film directed by Leon Kilmovsky, who together with Paul Naschy in the lead have done a total of 12 films in this werewolf series, titled Hombre Lobo, with this one being the 5th instalment. Little side note here as well, this is the only film in the whole collection to be in colour. Hopefully not to its detriment. The plot follows Count Vodemar, our werewolf hero, and together with 2 girls, he resurrects and then kills the vampire woman. Ooh. The plot's fine to this. It's a little by the books and trashy, but it's watchable. The pacing starts out pretty good, especially compared with the last film, but unfortunately dips quite drastically in the middle and then ends on a bit of a whimper.
People are afraid of those who live near the monastery. They think I'm crazy. You don't think I'm crazy, do you? I get angry when people think I'm crazy. Some say a werewolf tore open their throat. Even I have been under suspicion. No, I never killed anyone. No. People blab all the time. They say a lot of things about me. It is only lies they are spreading. Rumors, and none of them are true.
The characters are all fine here, with the standouts being the vampires for the uncanny way that they move about. Really adds to the atmosphere. The acting and dubbing are awful, but in a charmingly watchable way. Some funny lines here and there, and with the Spanish melodrama. It's great. The werewolf? He's not the best, but he's not the worst either. We get to see a lot of him, which is nice, especially compared with the last film that we saw, werewolf-wise. But there's no big transformation scene, really, until the very end, and it's a little bit naff. The sets and the use of shadows work really well for the creepy vibes, but the big final battle at the end, the versus battle, vampire and werewolf, is massively disappointing. It just boils down to an uncoordinated tussle on the ground. Shame, really. I think that's all I've got to say on this one.
Genevieve?
Okay, time for the print. Screaming Skull is awful, as you probably expected. It's clearly a VHS rip and it flickers frequently throughout. It's also quite compressed, so the darks and lights all sort of blur into one, making it very difficult to figure out what you're trying to see. The audio isn't great either. It's got a very persistent hum throughout it, and it's very difficult to make out what the actors are saying, especially the lead actress. And Werewolf versus Vampire Woman, you know what? It's not too bad. There's a really weird thing that happens with it where the really lighter sections of the screen sort of judder about a little bit, sort of wobble. I'm going to try and show, hopefully, but I don't know if it'll actually transfer across with the conversion. Not sure. We'll see. It's not unwatchable, but along with a few compressed dark areas, it's not ideal. And there's a very persistent buzzing sound in the background of this one, and the audio clips quite frequently. Definitely not the worst prints that we've seen, but still very low quality.
Cries. She cries in the night. I think he expects her to show up.
Okay, time for the case. And we get some spelling errors again. We've got this one here spelled unexplainable wrong. And there are some incorrect names here too. The director of Werewolf vs. Vampire Woman was Leon Kilmovsky. Guess they couldn't be bothered to type it all out. And this dude's name should be Andre Reese, not Andrew. Outside of this though, everything is correct, including the runtimes, which is a surprise. And on the disc, same as usual. Both films this time start with this weird border, which we figured out in the last episode was supposed to be this effect of a drive-through theatre. Shoddy work. Overall then, two very mediocre films. Both falter in the pacing, but both have charming moments. I wouldn't recommend Screaming Skull. If you want to see a skeleton in a decent film, maybe check out Jason and the Argonauts or Army of Darkness. And I wouldn't recommend Werewolf vs. Vampire Woman. Difficult to figure out what to recommend with this one really though. Freddy vs. Jason, that's a good versus film. Get that one watched instead. Okay, time to see what links these two films together. Why do they share a disc? Bit of a stretch this time, but both feature skeletons and screaming animals. So there we have it. All the films watched and discussed. So join me next time when I'm going to be doing a little bit of a retrospective, see what we can make of all of this. And as a little aside, I have a letterboxd for those who use it. Old Man Chimes on there. If you want to follow me on there, I've made a list of all the films in this series ranked from best to worst. If you're interested in looking, little link just there for you. See you next time. Well, here we are then. We've looked at all the films and we've discussed all the releases, and I think I can quite confidently say that I am the person who has discussed Dripping Blood Theatre more than anybody else in the world, including the people who put the DVDs out. But was it all worth it? What have we learned from this experience? And are my crazy dead of night conspiracies true? Let's have a look, shall we? Let's start by looking at the dead of night angle. I still think these were put out either after or alongside the Dead of Night DVDs by the same company. We mentioned this box in the intro episode, identical to the Dead of Night one, and even though it could just be some downloadable template or something, it just seems too coincidental to me. The logos look like they came from the exact same graphic designer, especially if you start looking into the shock horror box set as well. And then we have what's on the disc, a collection of royalty-free films terribly crammed to a disc without any remastering. And then there's the spelling errors on the cases and the shoddy prints. It all just screams Dead of Night to me. It might still all be speculation from my part, there is no hard evidence, but along with the numbering on the spines and everything that I've mentioned, I can't see how these two releases weren't put out by the same company. Alright then, let's have a look at the films themselves. Did Dripping Blood Theatre manage to release anything worth your time? Well, in my opinion, there is only one good film in this collection, and that is A Bucket of Blood, which is the surprisingly engaging comedy horror from Roger Corman. There was also Track of the Vampire, but I believe there is a better way to watch this film. As we discussed, it's been chopped and changed quite a lot. This is a TV edit and it's the last iteration of this film. There is an Arrow box set out with all the versions on, and I reckon there's probably something worth watching in there. Track of the Vampire, maybe not the best way to watch that film. And the worst film of the collection has got to be Revolt of the Zombies, which is on the first disc we looked at. And at just over an hour long, it was one of the most difficult sitting experiences I had with this entire collection. So, as I said in my previous episode, I have a best to worst list of all these films over on my Letterboxd if you follow me. Just Old Band Chimes if you want to look me up. And you can get a heads up on some reviews that are coming out and just see what I've been watching recently, if you're interested. Let's discuss the anomalies on the discs. Outside of the spelling errors and terrible prints, we also ran into the strange border on 3 films, which turned out to be an animated intro that they completely forgot to animate. Don't know why they bothered including it really, it wasn't needed in any way. Then we have the scene from Night of the Living Dead that's just slapped in there in front of a film, which I've been racking my brain trying to figure out why. My only guess is that they were planning to release it, as I'm pretty sure it's not had copyright for a very long time. But they didn't get around to it, whatever the reason, it's bizarre. And then the biggest blunder of the whole release in my opinion was having the first 20 minutes of Blood Creature be so out of sync it made it completely unwatchable. Quite a few anomalies there for only 5 discs. Seems like they just didn't give a shit. And it seems like they got worse as they went along. So one thing that I don't think I've mentioned yet, that's kind of interesting, is that very similar to Dead of Night Collection's shock horror box set, Dripping Blood Theatre has its own collection box set of all 5 discs. Dripping Blood Collection, it's known as. And no, I don't own a copy of it. 1, because I already own all the films and the crap, and I don't want another copy of them floating around. And 2, I am not paying these prices for it. That is absurd. And the same can be said for some of these other releases as well. The Blood Creature DVD, which is absolutely butchered and doesn't work properly, goes for outrageous prices online. Do not pay these prices for these films. In fact, don't buy these films full stop. These are not worth your money. While I was reviewing Dead of Night and Vipco, some films cropped up that were pretty decent, and at the time of the review, that was the only way to see them through those release companies. There's only 2 films, 1 or 2 films worth watching, and they have better releases. So Do not collect Dripping Blood Theatre. Do not waste your money. It's not worth it. One last thing that I don't think I've mentioned really is how draining it was watching 2 of these films back to back. I did do that for every disc, watch a film, write up a little bit about it, then straight on with the other, and all of these films suffered from pacing issues, which meant that you'd get to the end of one and you'd be like, oh no, I've got another one to watch. I wouldn't recommend it, and it was pretty horrible. So let's sum this whole thing up, shall we? I think that I have talked Dripping Blood Theatre to death at this point. So, I definitely think that there is a connection to Dead of Night. I wouldn't say that the films are worth watching and the releases are not worth owning. Have I learned anything from this experience? No, because I knew they were going to be shit going into it, and they were shit. I wasn't pleasantly surprised or anything. They were about as crap as I expected, so no, I've not learned anything from this whole thing. Let's move on to something good, shall we? For those with a keen eye out there, you may have noticed a little collection growing in the background of these videos. And yes, they are going to be my next review series. I hope you've enjoyed your time talking Dripping Blood, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next series.